Stop buying rice. That sentence already irritated someone. Good. Irritation means a belief just got touched. Rice feels responsible. Clean. Adult. It's what people buy when they want proof that the rules are still intact. When supply chains thin, comfort disguises itself as discipline, and that mistake gets expensive fast. This is about you, right now. Because when pressure arrives, calories don't fail first. Predictability does. Rice assumes water, heat, time, and patience will all show up together. That assumption belongs to stable systems. Collapse doesn't remove food, it removes coordination. The error isn't nutritional, it's logistical. This is where most people get it wrong. They plan food like a spreadsheet: weight, calories, shelf life, numbers that behave nicely on paper. What they forget is friction. Every step between hunger and eating is a point of failure. Heat disappears. Water becomes contested. Time compresses. Suddenly, the food that looked smart becomes unusable when you need it most. The mistake doesn't hurt immediately. It shows up later when stress is high and margins are thin, when power flickers. When you're counting minutes instead of days, that's when cheap stops meaning affordable and starts meaning usable. The food that saves you isn't the one that lasts longest in storage. It's the one that still works when conditions collapse unevenly. Remember this. Families don't starve because food vanishes. They starve because food requires cooperation from systems that are already slipping. Cooking becomes negotiation. Storage becomes risk. Smell becomes attention. Every additional step adds exposure. Under pressure, simplicity isn't preference, it's protection. And it gets worse. Hunger doesn't arrive politely. It shows up during arguments. In the dark, in noise. When children are loud, adults are exhausted, and patience is already gone. That's when foods designed for comfort turn into anchors. They slow everything down. They demand resources that aren't reliable anymore. There's a class of food people dismiss as trash. Loud packaging, embarrassing labels, things you buy without thinking and never brag about. Those foods weren't designed for dignity. They were engineered for chaos. No prep, no ceremony, no dependence on stability. They assume the environment is hostile and time is scarce. This is the detail people miss. Junk food didn't become valuable because it's healthy. It became valuable because it collapses friction. No heat, no water, no waiting, no negotiation. When pressure spikes, the brain prioritizes certainty over optimization. Familiar, immediate food quiets problems before they cascade. By the time people start realizing this, shelves don't empty, they flip. The responsible food stays. The junk disappears first. Not because it's better for you, but because it works under stress, because it removes steps, because it keeps households quieter, faster, less visible. Survival doesn't reward discipline. It tolerates whatever still functions when conditions don't. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see where the survivors are watching from. And hit subscribe while you're here. Once instability sets in, food stops being about nutrition and starts being about behavior. Not what keeps the body optimal, but what keeps people functional. How quickly hunger turns into irritability. How much effort someone is willing to spend just to feel normal again. Under pressure, food becomes a behavioral control system, whether anyone admits it or not. This is the part everyone misses. They think survival food should be virtuous, clean, optimized, something that fits an identity they're proud of. But hunger doesn't respond to virtue. It responds to immediacy, speed, familiarity. A stressed brain doesn't want balance. It wants certainty, something it recognizes and can process without thought. The delayed consequence shows up in households first. Cooking schedules break down quietly. Meals stop happening at predictable times. Water gets rationed without discussion. Heat becomes intermittent, negotiated, sometimes denied. Suddenly, the food that required planning starts requiring permission. Permission to use fuel. Permission to make noise. Permission to take time. That's when friction turns meals into arguments. And it gets worse. Because food isn't just fuel, it's morale. When stress stacks, people don't just need calories, they need resolution. They need something that ends the tension instead of extending it. Something that works in the dark. Something that doesn't ask questions or create follow-up problems. This is where junk earns its reputation in reverse. It wasn't designed for health. It was designed for impatience. For broken schedules. For environments where attention is limited and conditions are hostile. It doesn't assume a kitchen or a routine. It assumes a human under pressure reaching for something that works immediately. The reframe matters here. This isn't about health, it's about compliance. The food that calms people fastest becomes valuable not because it's good for them, but because it prevents secondary problems: panic, noise, bargaining, exhaustion. The things that drain households faster than hunger ever could. Remember this detail. Under stress, people default to the familiar. Foods tied to memory bypass resistance. They don't require persuasion. They don't invite debate. That matters when time is scarce and emotions are sharp. Familiar food short-circuits conflict before it starts. Watch what happens next. Families begin selecting food not by nutrition but by outcome. Which meals ended quietly? Which ones caused friction? Which ones required explanation? Over time, the answers repeat. Foods that demand attention get sidelined. Foods that resolve situations quickly become preferred, regardless of label. By the time shortages feel real, the families that stabilize aren't eating better. They're eating with less negotiation, less preparation, less visibility. That's why certain cheap items disappear quietly while others sit untouched. Not because they're superior, but because they function when conditions don't. Hunger doesn't reward discipline. It rewards efficiency. By now, the pattern should be obvious if you're willing to look at outcomes instead of intentions. Food that looks smart on paper often fails in practice. Not because it's bad, but because it assumes cooperation from a world that no longer provides it reliably. It assumes timing, utilities, calm. Collapse breaks those assumptions first. This is where most people get caught. They stock food for an imaginary calm, a version of disruption where time is available, tempers are steady, and utilities fade politely. That version is comforting. It also rarely arrives. What arrives instead is interruption, noise, delay, overlapping problems stacking faster than they can be resolved. The mistake doesn't show up on day one. It shows up when routines collapse, when meals stop being background activity and start becoming events. When every decision costs energy you don't have. When thinking about food takes longer than eating it. That's when anything requiring thought becomes a burden instead of a solution. Remember this. Under pressure, the winning foods aren't the healthiest or the cheapest by weight. They're the ones that remove steps. Steps between hunger and relief. Steps between conflict and quiet. Every step eliminated is energy preserved. Anything that collapses that distance quietly gains value. And it gets worse. Because visibility matters more than people want to admit. Cooking smells travel. Prep creates noise. Repetition creates patterns. Patterns get noticed. The more complex the food, the more visible the household becomes. Simple foods leave less trace, less sound, less light, less reason for someone else to pay attention. This is the detail most plans ignore. Preparedness isn't just about endurance, it's about exposure. Every action broadcasts something. Every routine tells a story. Food that requires tools, time, and space tells a loud one. Food that works instantly tells almost nothing at all. The reframe is uncomfortable. Preparedness isn't about looking disciplined. It's about reducing signals. Foods people mock as trash were optimized for environments where discretion matters, where speed matters, where you don't want to advertise that you have resources worth noticing. Watch how behavior shifts. People stop choosing food based on what they should eat and start choosing based on what ends the problem fastest, which meals cause no discussion. Which ones didn't draw attention? Which ones worked in bad conditions without follow-up issues? By the time people realize this, competition starts for the wrong reasons. Not because the food is nutritious or impressive, but because it functions under pressure. The shelves don't empty randomly. They empty according to friction. What disappears first is whatever still works when everything else doesn't. Survival doesn't care about dignity. It doesn't reward ideals. It tolerates what functions and quietly removes everything that doesn't. By the time shortages become visible, food has already changed roles. It's no longer sustenance, it's leverage. The shift happens quietly, before shelves look empty, before anyone admits there's a problem. People stop asking what's healthy and start asking what works right now. That question decides which households stay contained and which start leaking stress into the open. This is where most people misread the moment. They think scarcity creates competition. It doesn't. It creates prioritization. Decisions narrow. Tolerance shrinks. The value of food stops being measured in calories and starts being measured in outcomes. Does this calm the room? Does it buy time? Does it keep things from escalating? The delayed consequence isn't hunger. It's exposure. Meals that require setup require signaling. Time, light, sound, smell. Each one broadcasts activity. Under pressure, attention becomes a cost you didn't plan for. The foods that survive aren't the most nutritious. They're the quietest. The ones that don't announce themselves. And it gets worse. Once food becomes leverage, it reshapes relationships inside the home first. Negotiations start where routines used to be. Complaints escalate. Children learn which foods exist and which are not for now. Adults start rationing patience instead of calories. That's when food stops feeding people and starts regulating behavior. Remember this. Anything that reduces discussion gains value. Anything that ends the argument quickly becomes precious. The food that works isn't the one that nourishes best. It's the one that stabilizes fastest. Under stress, people trade nutrition for silence without hesitation. This is where junk flips the script. It was engineered for predictability. Same taste, same texture, same result. No surprises. That predictability becomes control when everything else is variable. Familiar food calms people without explanation. It doesn't ask for patience. It doesn't invite debate. It just works. The reframe matters here. It's not about what the food gives you. It's about what it prevents. Noise, delay, conflict, attention. Secondary problems that spiral faster than hunger itself. The foods that eliminate second-order problems quietly become assets whether you respect them or not. Watch how judgment disappears. By the time people admit what's happening, they stop judging shelves by labels and start judging them by outcomes. Which foods ended the night calmly? Which ones caused friction? Which ones drew attention? The answers repeat themselves quickly. Survival doesn't reward intention. It doesn't care what you meant to do or what you planned for. It rewards results. And under pressure, the result that matters most is containment of hunger, of stress, of visibility. Everything else becomes optional. Once stress becomes routine, food choices stop being personal and start being systemic. What began as preference hardens into pattern. Patterns become habits. Habits turn into defaults. What works gets repeated without discussion, not because it's ideal, but because it's already proven under pressure. This is where most people get caught again. They assume bad food decisions fail fast. They don't. They fail socially, over time. The cost isn't illness or collapse. It's friction, the quiet accumulation of effort that drains patience and attention until something snaps. Meals become heavier than the calories they deliver. The mistake doesn't punish immediately. It waits until flexibility disappears, when every meal demands the same resources at the same moment. When one missing element, heat, water, time, halts the entire process, that's when food stops being resilient and starts being fragile. Fragility isn't obvious until it's exposed. Remember this detail. Resilience isn't about endurance, it's about adaptability. The ability to function despite interruption. Foods that tolerate disruption outperform foods that demand consistency. Under sliding conditions, cheaper and simpler options keep working while elegant plans stall. And it gets worse. Visibility compounds. Once a household's food patterns are noticed, expectations form. Others observe who cooks, when, and how often. Predictability attracts attention. Attention invites questions. Questions bring pressure. Pressure changes behavior long before anyone admits it exists. The reframe is uncomfortable. Being prepared doesn't mean eating better than others. It means eating in ways that don't create signals. Food choices stop being private decisions and start acting like broadcasts. Anything that advertises routine becomes a liability when scarcity spreads unevenly. Foods that leave little trace protect privacy. No prep, no lingering smell. No predictable timing. Privacy becomes a resource when attention carries weight. The less your meals announce themselves, the fewer assumptions others make about what you have and when you have it. This is where judgment fails. People cling to foods that match identity instead of environment. They defend choices that worked during stability long after stability has thinned. Pride keeps them loyal to routines that no longer fit. Meanwhile, the foods that survive are the ones no one argued about. They just worked. By the time adaptation happens, the window has narrowed. Shelves don't refill, they get reassigned. What disappears isn't what's healthiest or most virtuous. It's what removes friction under stress. Hunger doesn't negotiate. It optimizes, quietly, relentlessly, until only what still functions remains. In the end, food stops being a plan and becomes a filter. What passes through chaos and what doesn't. Planning assumes choice. Filters don't. They let certain things through and discard the rest without debate. By this stage, intention has been replaced by outcome. What remains isn't what you wanted to eat, it's what survived repeated failure. By now, the households that stabilized didn't do it by eating well. They did it by reducing steps, reducing noise, reducing negotiation. Their food choices didn't look impressive or disciplined. They looked invisible, no routine to observe. No signal to interpret. That invisibility is why they lasted longer than the ones who planned perfectly. This is the detail people forget. The most dangerous phase isn't running out of food, it's running out of tolerance. Tolerance for noise, for delay, for negotiation, for disappointment. Once tolerance collapses, anything that still functions gains disproportionate power. When patience is gone, function becomes authority. Foods that work in the dark, in silence, without heat, without discussion. They don't save the body first, they stabilize the environment around it. They prevent arguments. They shorten nights, they reduce attention. That matters more than nutrition when stress has already hollowed out reserves. And it gets worse, one last time. Because once these foods are accepted as normal, the moral argument disappears. No one cares what's junk anymore. That debate belongs to stability. What matters now is what ended the night without conflict. What kept voices low? What didn't escalate into something bigger than hunger? Remember this. Survival isn't about dignity. Dignity is a luxury of coordination. Survival is about containment. Containing hunger before it becomes anger. Containing stress before it leaks outward. Containing visibility before it attracts interest. Foods that quietly manage all three become foundational whether you approve of them or not. Watch how language changes. People stop defending their choices. They stop explaining. Food becomes something that simply happens, not something that's discussed. That silence is the signal. The system has finished sorting. What remains is what works under pressure without commentary. By the time people start arguing about nutrition again, one of two things has happened. Stability has returned, and the debate feels safe again. Or it never will, and the debate no longer matters. Until one of those conditions is met, function outranks ideals every time. Rice assumes cooperation. Water, heat, time, patience. Chaos doesn't offer those reliably. It offers interruption, noise, friction. Anything that still works inside that environment earns its place regardless of how it looks on paper. Survival isn't granted by good choices. It's tolerated by the ones that still function when conditions don't. Tomorrow doesn't ask what you planned. It checks what worked and discards the rest without explanation.